Hi class, Professor Bennett here. I'm reporting live today from the Long Beach Post offices in beautiful downtown Long Beach, California. So as I mentioned, the Long Beach Post is a all digital online news source. It's the largest news source for the city of Long Beach, and I'm an editor at large here. I was the executive editor right out of grad school a long time ago, and so part of my trajectory into journalism has always been helping to try and fix the areas that I see and that I'm sure that you all see based on your line of questioning in Module 1's Welcome Week questions. You all see that there are problems with the news industry and the way that news is presented today. And so I feel very passionately about helping to fix some of those problems that you are all addressing. And I'm hoping that these classes and that the journalism program at Santa Ana College can generate new journalism students to go out into the field and to fight the good fight and to help grow and expand some of these news organizations like the Long Beach Post or like others, or make your own, which I've also done before. If you don't see it, build it yourself using the skills that you'll learn in this class. There's a huge, huge need for diverse voices, for new perspectives, and for new models of journalism, because journalism has become a business and not a service. And I believe that journalism should be a public service. So let's start with some foundational questions and some foundational understandings that maybe will help and will help answer some of your questions that you've had. So I work in journalism. Ask me anything, which is what I posed to all of you. And so this was one that I thought was really poignant. This was the question that really hit my heart the most, because we do have people in this class that are very interested in pursuing a career in journalism. Many more of you are just here to see how it works. Many more just want to learn to write better and more clearly. All of these are great reasons to be in this class. But I'm seeing this often and frequently, even when I talk about being a journalist in my own personal life, that people are baffled by the relevance, and the word relevant always gets to me. How would you say that journalism is relevant for a young adult to pursue in a career? And my instinct is to say you are the future. The young adults are the future. Without you learning how to produce journalism and how to report and write the news accurately and fairly and objectively, and knowing how to pick out valuable information, this entire system falls apart. Democracy is based upon the freedom of information and the marketplace of ideas, as they say. But one of the original, and the reason I have these two, these two comics here, is that I think they really speak to what journalism, the foundation of journalism is, and the role that it really serves in society. And so here on the left, you can see that there's these three branches of government, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard the term the fourth estate. They call journalists the fourth estate because the journalists are supposed to represent the people, and the people keep the other three branches of government in checks and balances. So the reason we have three branches of government, you guys know those, right? Legislative, executive, and judicial. Ideally, when those are all working in working order, they are checking and balancing each other. So they provide checks and balances so that the president doesn't get too big, or that the judiciary doesn't have too much power, or that the legislative branch doesn't have too much power. But who oversees these three? Who keeps these three in check? And the answer is the people. That's how democracy was set up. That's how our founding fathers wrote the First Amendment. I really suggest you go back and review Module 1 and the page that I put on there about the First Amendment. It's the basis of everything that we do. And so without the fourth estate, without the freedom of the press to oversee those three branches of government, we don't have any control or say in it. Then the government rules our lives, and we need to tell the government what we think they should be doing. Your taxpayer dollars pay for every salary. It pays for my salary. If I'm not doing a good enough job, you have every right to speak out. And maybe people don't see journalism as being relevant because they don't even see the potential for change. I feel like a lot of people, especially in certain parts of Orange County, don't feel empowered to make those changes. And I feel like young people, especially youth in Southern California, don't feel empowered. You're not told that you have a say, or that you can have, that life can be better, or that you can deserve better things. But you're paying tax dollars for amenities like from the library to the school to city hall to your streets to access to education to access to healthcare. All of these things that you rely on from the government, are you getting them in a way that is good enough for you? And if it's not, journalism is a way to speak truth to power. If there's another great quote about journalism, that if you want to change the world, journalism is the most active way to get results. We've seen this with the El Don multiple times, that there are stories that things that have bothered students forever, and until the El Don went and reported on it and wrote about it. For example, last year, the changing nursing hours for the Health and Wellness Center. Doctors were scheduled less frequently, and that affected students' access to doctors. A doctor was only on our campus about 2 days a week instead of 4 days a week like it is up at Santiago Canyon College. And so our student editors reported it and researched it and looked into it, and the administration read it. So journalists are a way to take information from the people, to go gather all the sources and information around that, to figure out what's going on, and to present that information in a way that the government, whatever local, regional, academic, whatever government entity you're talking about, can know what those complaints are and can see it all in front of them. So I would say that journalism is relevant because it's crucial to living in a free society. How are we supposed to move through our lives and make decisions unless we have access to accurate and fair and objective information? It's impossible. Think of living in a country where there is no media, where there is no information. I mean, you end up in a place like North Korea or something. I hate to be so extreme, but realistically, you don't know what's going on next door or down the street. You don't know what the government is doing. You have no way to speak out against it. You have no agency. And so the fact that journalism is seemingly on the decline because of the decline of news organizations and businesses to present it, I don't think that those two things go hand in hand. I think that the core of journalism and the necessity of journalism exists and will always exist. We will always need information. We will always want to know what's going on in our communities, but we need to help rebuild the news system. And that's why I made you watch that TED Talk from the former journalist, the CNN journalist. She gave 3 ideas to change a broken news industry. And I agree with a lot of those. And I do whatever I can in my practice to help build new systems and new models for sustainable journalism, because people will need that information. Whether or not they're willing to pay for it is up to the value proposition that you give. And it's also up to the trustworthiness. And as we'll talk about, trust needs to be earned, right? You can't just wake up one day and start a blog and be trustworthy. But a main thing that is important about journalism and the role that journalism serves in today's society, and I do believe this wholeheartedly, is that if there's nobody to report on information and on the goings on of government and what's happening in your city and your community, it does a disservice to everybody. You allow things to go rampant. You allow misuse of tax dollars to happen on every level. And this has been proven time and time again. I do have an article here that the impacts of local news deserts, when newspapers close up shop, there isn't as much scrutiny. When it's, no news is good news, as that comic showed. So when there's not scrutiny over governmental decisions, when nobody's sitting in the meetings and in the public meetings, or even in the planning commission meetings to speak out on behalf of the people, and as you'll learn this week in Module 2, of the audience, then prices go up, government blows, there's no oversight. So relevance wise, someone needs to be the checks and balances for the other three branches of government. That's the main role I see of journalism. Of course, it expands on into music journalism and pop culture and all of the interests and everything you mentioned in week one. But journalism at its core and the First Amendment exists so that we can speak truth to power and so that we can call out injustices and speak for the voiceless. Most people don't have time to go seek out the truth. They rely on information. So who's going to be there to provide that information? I think now more than ever, we need trained journalists who are ethical and have the values of honesty and fairness and accuracy embedded in their bones. With great power comes great responsibility. I'll say that a lot in this class, and I do believe it to be true. So it takes a lot of effort to do this right. It takes a lot of integrity to do it for a long time and to build the trust that you need in order to become a reputable source. But I think it's important now more than ever to hold power accountable and to, as they say, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. That is the role of journalism as the fourth estate, as we can see here. So there were some questions on reading news that I do want to address real quick. Someone asked, how do I personally curate my news? How do I distinguish between what is factual and what is fake? Do I avoid fake news? Do I also read that news to stay informed? This gets into larger questions of like, what is fake news even with quotation marks around it? Obviously fake, I don't call news fake if I just don't agree with the perspective on it. I don't paint those kinds of blanket statements. If there are truly factual inaccuracies, how do we know that? How do we figure that out? So I do my own research. I would say that I read everything. I read as much as possible. I even read news sources that I don't always agree with, that I personally think have a bias or a slant. I still make sure to read those because I do like to know everything that's going on there. I don't believe in shutting out information. I believe in being a more active and engaged media consumer and using my own judgment of accuracy and fairness as a way to decide whether or not I'm going to take the information from that article or not. So I really do like to stay up to date on everything that is being published and being reported, especially on a certain topic, because then you read 10 different perspectives and somewhere in between you can find your own as a news consumer. What do I think of news aggregation sites? Kind of in that same vein of filtering things out. Aggregate means that they're pulling a bunch of stuff together. Maybe like a Reddit is a good news aggregation site. But think of all the things that you're not getting on that aggregation site. You know, and a news aggregation site, that's just another level of another gatekeeper. And so I would say if you're using news aggregation sites, make sure you use multiple ones. Twitter is a news aggregator in some ways, and so that's why I try and set up different lists so that I can view different aggregations of all of the news. There's no way to stay up to date on everything. You'll drive yourself crazy trying, but I do try and have a healthy media diet from across different perspectives and different sources. And I tried really hard personally to get out of my filter bubble. If my ads on Google are marketing to me in a different or not marketing to me, if I don't like those ads, I feel like that's good because that means that I've messed with my algorithm enough. So I really try and screw with my algorithm, I think, and by reading things that maybe other people might consider fake news. Now, there is also this idea of fake news as just meaning regurgitated information, like information that doesn't have context. And there's a lot of publications that do that. It's not necessarily fake, like the information was presented in a way, but it's not necessarily given context. There's not independent reporting, which really hurts my heart sometimes. So that was kind of a loaded question, but I hope I kind of helped answer it from my perspective. And then obviously lots of questions on trust, credibility, and bias, which I love. These are all questions that I have had and that I had when I was first starting out and that I continue to have. These are not cut and dry answers. These are questions that are being debated in newsrooms every day still. And hopefully I can give you some tools in order to know how to assess the news for credibility, and how to distinguish what is good journalism, quote unquote, from bad. We do have some some levels of integrity and of ethics that we do judge journalism by. And then how do you know what sources that you can trust? Do they show their work? Do they show transparency? Do they show you where they got their information from, or are they just telling you to believe this and trust me on this? Trust has to be earned. That's the main thing I can say, is that trust has to be earned every day, time and time again. That's why we have these legacy news organizations that have proven that they, over time, that in general, they are reporting the news accurately and fairly and in a way that benefits their audience. So is it possible to be unbiased as a professional news reporter? I think as that the negotiation between bias and transparency has changed a lot lately and in journalism, and there's an attitude, maybe not at the major publications, but especially when you deal with columnists, that as long as people are transparent about their biases, then they can still be professional news reporters. Now, here at the Long Beach Post, we have very strict policies about, especially for news reporters, about showing their bias online. They're not allowed to talk about their political affiliations or anything, but our columnists, however, are allowed. So the columnists are very open about their opinions and their beliefs, and that way you know where their opinion articles are coming from. And we always really try to balance the opinion pieces with news pieces that have facts that are backed up by facts. Even if you write an opinion piece, it has to be based in facts as well. But you might be allowed to take more of a slant or to express an opinion in a way that you would not be able to do in a news story, that you will not be able to do in your news writing that you're doing in this class. So different channels do have different opinions. I would say they have different audiences is more of the correct answer to that. A lot of publications are credible to certain audiences within their audiences. But Module 2 and Chapter 1 in your textbook are going to give you some tools that you can use to determine the credibility of a news source and mainly who their audience is and what are their intentions. As far as being a media consumer, what do I look out for? I always check attributions. Do they say who said this? That's a big question when we start writing news. I go, who said? You can't just say that something is this way or something is that way. I'm going to ask you, who said it? You got to prove it. Did somebody say that? Did you read about it on the internet? If you read about it on the internet, what was the source? Was it Wikipedia? Is it an uncited Wikipedia sentence? That's not going to hold up. Imagine you're in like a courtroom, right? And you're trying to drill down a news source's article and trying to determine where they got their information from. Can you see the source of that information? Can you see the files or the original reporting that they've done? Who did they talk to? Are these opinions that they've made up themselves, or things that they feel, or did they go out and talk to people? And these are real live people that are saying these things. I think this way, or I feel this way. So I do think that there are some ways in the media, just with media literacy and being an active and informed media consumer, that we can do when we're reading things to assess credibility and to assess bias and to assess audience centricity with the news sources that we're reading. I do think it's possible to be a reliable journalist with a bias. There are plenty of news outlets that will allow you to express your opinion, but all opinion pieces, even at the New York Times, even at every major news organization, they will have columnists and opinion writers, and all of their stuff needs to be fact-checked as well. You can't have an opinion based off of misinformation. That's something that most news organizations wouldn't stand for. But then again, you have a lot of things that are not, you have a lot of media outlets and news sources that are not abiding by some of these core tenets of journalism that I'm talking about. So you have to look into the news organization itself. What does their about page say? Do they abide by the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics? Do they take into account AP style? All of these things that will show that there is integrity in the product. Again, trust and credibility need to be earned. You need to earn it by showing your work, by proving that you are a reliable source, by proving that you actually go out and talk to people. This happens even in the food writing world. You know, if I was writing a food review, I would have to go to the restaurant and actually eat at the restaurant. And there are other publications out there that earned a reputation, and it was earned, of writing about places that they'd never been. They would compile information from maybe Yelp reviews, or they would take someone else's Instagram posts and their opinions, and they would write about it that way. And I always made it a point, if I ever wrote about anything, I went there and I saw the place and I ate the food and I paid for it. I didn't take any freebies, any of that kind of stuff. So I like to think that I personally built up a lot of trust and credibility. So when I said that something was good, you knew that I went there. You knew that I was going to actually pay for it. I wasn't taking a free meal. Those kinds of things, even on something that seems as petty as food writing, or not as serious as maybe covering City Hall, but there's little ways that in all of these that you can work on building trust and credibility. And the audience knows, you guys know, when you're being BS'd, and you can read through it in a lot of ways. You can see if this is advertorial sometimes. You can tell that this is just written off of a press release. So it's up to us as trained journalists. Now you are being trained. There's no excuses to not make the efforts to show your work and to show where you're getting your information from, to attribute all of your information and to attribute your sources, and to show your audience and your readers where you're getting that from. That is a really good way to build trust and credibility. In the end, it's, do you trust me or not? That's the question that every news organization asks their audience every single day. And we'll learn some tools in order to do that. And we had some questions about the future of journalism, which again, I think that the TED Talk really spoke to some ways that we can change this and that we can work on this. But I really loved the line of these questions, and again, appreciate everybody for participating in this. Although journalism and media are very important at the moment, newer generations tend not to care about the news as much as previous generations would. That's not accurate. Actually, I'm not sure where that information was coming from. New generations are more inundated with information than they know what to do with. So they care about the news. They just, maybe you are all thinking about news as only one thing. You're thinking maybe about news as the traditional news in TV or a traditional print newspaper, but news and journalism can take so many forms, as we're discovering in this class. So I don't think that journalism and media will die out. Printed newspaper is only the way that information was presented, because we have a textbook that is talking about digital media and writing and reporting for a digital age. So there are lots of ways that news is presented now in a way that is very different than it was presented before. So there are lots of things that can constitute journalism, and this is what makes me the most excited. The future of journalism to me is the most exciting thing, because the possibilities are almost endless. Like, if we think of journalism as, gathering and assessing and analyzing and verifying information and then getting it out there to people who need that information, think of how broad that is. Think of the conversations that you might have with your family. You read an article and then you passed it along to someone else, and you gave that information to someone else. And so by talking about things that are verified, the information that you verified to others, if you are sharing something on social media and you have verified information, you've done reporting, you've interviewed someone and you put it up on social media, to me, that's journalism. I have several friends that do community activism, and they think that what they do isn't journalism, but by posting on their social media, by calling out the things that they see, and by sharing factual, backed up, accurate information that is analyzed to an audience with their expertise and their knowledge, they're doing journalistic work. If you put a question out there on your Instagram story and you say, hey, what's the best burger place in Santa Ana? And you get a bunch of responses, and then you go out and you eat all those burgers and you say, some of these are good, some of those are bad. And then you put those back out there on social media and you say, oh, I got a bunch of suggestions and I went and tried them all. Here's what I found. You just did journalism. You did journalistic work. So there's a lot of ways that journalism can manifest, and I think it will have to change from the traditional ways that you are thinking about media and news. So when you say that newer generations tend not to care about the news as much as previous generations would, I'm hoping and I'm thinking that you are referring to traditional news outlets, perhaps the TV studio, the national TV news, even the daily newspaper. Those are just the platforms. Those are just the ways that news used to be presented. Everybody still needs to know what's going on in their community, what's going on in their lives, and what is happening at the city and the government, at the local, regional, statewide, national level that is affecting them. If the cost of living is going up in the state, that affects you and where you live in Orange County. If the city of Santa Ana enacts renter controls, that affects you and the way that you move through Santa Ana. If they don't, that also affects you. So there's a lot of things that happen all the time that are not being watched in a way that I think should be and could be, in order to actually save what we think of and what we know as journalism. So people do have a distrust of the media right now. Over to this question on the right. And with the current resident of the White House fueling that distrust, how do you suggest that perception can be changed, or can it? I definitely think it can be changed. And we've seen it just here at the Long Beach Post. This is why I'm sitting here today. We have definitely changed the perception of this publication just even since I was an editor-in-chief. When I took over here in 2012, it was a blog. It was like a political blog, and there were a lot of opinions on it. And I said, hey, Long Beach needs a news source. Let's turn this into a legitimate news source. So I took all the opinion stories and put them in an opinion section, and then I ran all of our news articles through the tenets of journalism that are outlined in the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. So I made sure everything was accurate. I used the inverted pyramid. I made sure that breaking news read like breaking news. I really streamlined a lot of this, and in a conscious effort to increase trust, to build transparency, and to bring a reputation back, a quality reputation back to the Long Beach Post. And now we have doubled, quintupled the size of the newsroom, I want to say. The quality of the reporters that are here, and I'm not bragging, this has nothing to do with me. This has to do with the news team that's here every day covering breaking news. They all used to work at the Press Telegram. You have combined several hundred years of journalism experience in Long Beach. And so that kind of stuff is helping to change the perceptions. The positive thing about all of this, and I know a lot of you think that everybody distrusts the media, but actually on a hyper local level, on community newspaper level, trust in media has never been better. So what that tells me is that we can create change. The perception can be changed, but it has to start locally first. It has to start on a street-by-street basis and a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis. It's not going to start at CNN. We're not going to build trust on a national level with a 24-hour TV news channel that's more entertainment than anything else. That's just not going to happen. So we need to inform the public on what news can be and on what the media can do for them and can help inform them and change their lives on a hyper local level. I think that will help very much change the perception of it. So rewatch that TED Talk if you're really interested in the future of journalism. There's so many people that are doing so many things and making efforts in all sorts of avenues to try and bring back trust and transparency to media, and in order to let the audience and let the people know that this exists and that there are journalists that are out there thinking of them and advocating for them in a way like never before. As I said, it's more important now than ever. So we have to save it. It's up to us as journalists to save it, and it's up to the next generation of journalists really to be good stewards of this profession and to help the public understand what information is important for them to live their free lives so that they can make their informed decisions. Okay, and then I got some really great questions about the career itself. What does it take to be a journalist? What kinds of things do you need? How do you make money at this? That's a pretty good question, right? Something that you should want to know. The good is that with the news industry up and kind of being shaken up right now, there are so many more opportunities. And I truly believe that your generation, the next generation of students who are coming out of this journalism school or even learning about journalism, you guys are going to be the ones that are making the next level of jobs, and you're going to be creating your own titles, which is essentially what I've done in a lot of ways, just by thinking innovatively and by seeing gaps in what news organizations need and inserting myself into that and to help change that. So the first question, do you need a degree or perfect writing skills? I would say no, you don't need a degree, but yes, you do need good writing skills. You need good communication skills. That's why in this class we focus on news writing and reporting. So even if you end up going into TV or even social media reporting, you need good writing skills. You have to be able to communicate clearly and accurately. Spelling matters, grammar matters. If it looks like you don't care enough to check your spelling or to check the grammar of your sentences, how can your audiences trust you and trust that you care enough to go check your facts, right? So we need our writing to be as clear and as accurate and as important and impactful as the information that we're presenting. The writing is a reflection of you as a reporter and you as a person, and we're only as good as our integrity in this industry. We're only as good as the effort and the time that we take in reporting and presenting our information. So while you don't need a degree, I went back to school after I started writing. I was already a journalist. So I do believe that journalism is a meritocracy. We're not lawyers. We don't have to take a bar exam. We are empowered by the First Amendment to do what we do, which is beautiful because that means that anybody can do this and anybody can enter the ring and have their voice heard. But I also do believe that you need some form of skills-based education. You have to have writing skills. You have to have photo skills. You have to have video skills. You have to have reporting skills. You have to know how to interviewing skills. You have to be able to take all this information, put it together in a clear and concise way, to distill it down, to figure out what's the most interesting thing, what's the most important thing, what's the latest thing, how do you write a lead, all of this kind of stuff that's tied in with writing skills and communication skills that you definitely do need to be a journalist. So no degree necessarily unless you're looking for higher editorial positions, but I know plenty of writers and professional journalists and professional writers who are not professionally trained. But it is important that you get these skills. So good on you for being in these classes. And in this class, a lot of journalism is like learned on the job, to be honest. So, get yourself out there if you're already thinking about that. So someone also asked about photography journalism. Are there different journalism fields? There totally are. So again, writing is this core foundation. If you can write breaking news, you can do anything. Then you can go take a photo of breaking news because you're already thinking like a news journalist. You're already thinking about what's the most important thing? What should I capture first? How is this story best told? And then you translate that into visuals. So writing is the core of what we do, but you can take that and do anything. And I keep telling my students that social media journalism is a growing and expanding field, that like you can make money running social media accounts for major publications. For the LA Times is hiring part of their audience engagement team. They're hiring like 10 social media editors, and these people's job it is to take all the information that the journalists report on, distill it down, and figure out a way to present it to the audience. So you need journalism skills in order to run social media accounts. Even if you're not doing it for a newspaper, you're doing it for a company or for a store even. So in the PR realm, these kinds of skills are really important too. So there's definitely photojournalism. I mean, if you're into computer science, you want to do coding, we could use coders in this industry. We can definitely use videographers, illustrators. If you are more of an ad sales person, or even if you're just more of a people person, you want to do community outreach and community listening, you can do that from an audience engagement perspective. If you want to be in more of a tech environment or a startup environment, those kinds of things are definitely open and available at emerging media organizations. So there's a lot of opportunities depending on what area you want to get into. As far as how you can break into the industry as a young journalist, it depends what area of the industry you want to be in. I would say if you're trying to write, I would get out there and try and get some clips. Joining the Eldon, I hate to keep making a plug for it, but we are the best two-year college newspaper in the country. And a lot of our student journalists win awards for their work. And I can honestly say that that helped me when I was a student in the Eldon. I would got awards, I won awards, and I was able to take those and parlay those into editorial jobs at the LA Weekly, at the OC Weekly, even here at the Long Beach Post. When I first got out of grad school, I was able to say, I'm an award-winning journalist. And I've since won other awards, which is another good way to break into the industry, is to participate in some and to enter your college work if you get it published in the Eldon or elsewhere, but enter it in awards ceremonies and get involved with like the LA Press Club, or if you are Hispanic or Asian, there's the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, National Association of Asian American Journalists. There's all these specialty industry groups, let's say, that are there for you, and they are definitely in the field of, in like the realm of mentorship. They want to help young writers. They want to give you experience and give you advice. The best thing to do is to get your feet wet. If you graduate from journalism school with a piece of paper that says, I know how to do journalism, you're not going to get a job. You need clips. We call them clips because back in the day they used to clip them out of the newspaper. But really, you need to write. You need to do it. The best way to break into the industry is to do it all the time. And if you don't have an outlet that you want to write for, if you can't get in at the OC Weekly or the LA Times or the LA Taco or any of these local publications, I always say start your own. That's what I did. Start an Instagram account. Start telling stories of your community. Make a WordPress account. Make your own blog. I come from a punk rock kind of DIY background. We call it DIY, do it yourself. If you don't see something, do it yourself. And with the opportunities that you have now, they're so endless. So if you would like to cover something specific to your street or to your neighborhood, or if you want to cover, music in Orange County, who's covering music in Orange County right now? Look it up. If there's nobody there that's doing what you would like to do, start it yourself. Make your own blog. Get your clips up and show what you can do. That is the best advice I can give, is to actually just do it. If you're not doing it every day, you're gonna lose it. It's like playing an instrument or being an athlete. If you don't practice every single day and you're not doing it, you're not gonna improve at all. So banking off of that, banking, ha ha ha. A lot of you had questions about money and how do you make money as a journalist, and this is definitely something that I am working on here at the Post and elsewhere for other publications, trying to help them figure out money streams, because if journalism is a business, then we are not beholden to people. And so where does the money come from? And we have proven, and other publications have proven, that if you provide a public service, people will pay for it. Memberships, grants, events. We could throw big events. Look at a publication like the Texas Tribune. I just love them as a model. So there are publications out there that are making money and that are hiring young people and that want your opinions. You are the future and want your skills. So how do you get started in this profession? I mentioned a little bit of it. What would be required to make a living out of it? Grit. It's not an easy profession. Being a journalist is a lot of not making friends. They say if you're making friends, you're not really doing your job. You have to have a really thick skin. It's a lot of stress. I'm not going to lie to you. There's a lot of deadlines, and there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of responsibility involved in what we do. So you have to be ready for that if you want to enter this industry. I'm not going to say that you're going to ever have a regular 9 to 5 where you get to go home and fall asleep and rest easy till the next day. So, but I do think it's realistic to make a decent living in today's climate. I don't think it will always be a hobby or a second job, but I do think that you need to make your own opportunities in this industry. The good thing is the opportunities are wide open. Nobody's trying lots of the things that need to be tried and that should be tried. So there's a lot of opportunities for growth in this industry, I think, and opportunities that all of you can latch onto and that you can use. So how is it paid right now? If you work here at the Long Beach Post and you have a full-time job as a reporter, you get paid on salary, you have health insurance, and your job 5 days a week, you figure out what days off you get. You basically take 5 days a week, and every day your job is to report and file stories along your beat. So the goal is to have a beat, is to have an expertise. That's another suggestion that I'll give to you, that find something that you know a lot about, or that you want to know more about, whether it's education in Santa Ana or music in Orange County, or you want to do like hone in on surfing at Huntington Beach, or city council in Westminster, right? There's very, very hyper specific beats, but if you find something that you're an expert in and you can become the expert in it, and you can cultivate sources, and you can analyze information and analyze the news that's coming out of there, you will be indispensable. So I find a gap in coverage. If your community is not being covered, who's going to cover it, right? So you can make those kinds of opportunities. You can find an investor, you can find someone to help you launch something like that. You can take paid subscriptions from people if you want to send out a newsletter, or you could just start an Instagram account for the good of your heart and try and start things that way, and then move on to something else. So there's lots of alternative models for journalism, but you will have to find your own way unless you find one of the few news outlets that are hiring and that do have full paying jobs. Outside of that, as far as making it a second job or a hobby, there are lots of freelance opportunities. One of my students last semester wrote a lot of content for the rolling paper, as they call it, the cannabis section on the OC Weekly. And so she submitted a lot of freelance work for them. So on a freelance basis, you're paid per story. So I've written big, huge stories for Time Magazine that pay me, a whole month's salary for one article. It took me a long time to write it. Or I got paid very minimally for the OC Weekly for about 6 years. I did a weekly food column, and they paid for a little bit of the meals, and then they gave me a little something on top. So that was really just more for fun. So I say know your worth, and push back on editors sometimes if they want to not charge you what you think your time and energy is worth. But if you're not full time, then it will be on a freelance basis, which means that it doesn't get taxed. It means you get a 1099 at the end, but that's a whole other story. If anyone in this class is interested in launching a freelance business or is interested in starting to pitch articles, or by the end of the semester, if you feel comfortable enough to start pitching articles, please come talk to me privately. I have a lot of experience. I spent many years as a full-time freelancer, so making ends meet and pulling that kind of stuff together. But increasingly there are positions that are available that are full-time and that have benefits, and that you can get. There are full-time positions to run, the Washington Post Snapchat account. There are lots of expanded opportunities for photographers and videographers and coders and product designers, social media editors, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of new roles emerging in journalism that might not have existed before, that are full-time paid gigs. So there are opportunities out there. And then these questions, I won't go over in too much detail because I think your module 2 will talk a lot about, you'll read chapter 1 of your textbook and it will answer some of this. How do you keep a reader engaged in your story? The stories that get the most attention are usually based on drama or scandals. How do you compete with that? You have to create a value proposition. You have to let people know how the news that you're talking about will influence and impact their lives. You can't get over some publications, all that they're going to do. I mean, the Weekly World News and a lot of tabloids and stuff, they're going to be based on drama and scandals. You can't compete with that, but you can prove that your news is good, and that the things you're covering will have an impact on your readers. And you have to write in a clear, concise, engaging way. You can't waste their time. They will know if you're wasting their time, and they won't keep reading you. So a lot of it is in how you write it, a lot of it is in how you report it, and some of it is in how you present it as well. Um, so does your boss choose your topics, or do the journalists come up with their own headline and news story first? I would say the headline comes last, first of all. Um, Sometimes your boss will assign you something, sometimes you find them. When you find a story, we call it enterprise reporting because you found it on your own. You're very enterprising, like you started a new business, let's say. But sometimes the boss says, hey, I heard there's something going on outside, go cover that right now. So we will talk later in the semester about how and where news comes from. Module 2 will talk about how to come up with how to balance what a community needs and what a community wants. And we will work on that news judgment and that critical thinking throughout the semester. That's really a very strong goal of mine. So these are some of the questions. I know this was kind of a long response video, but I really wanted to give you an overview, I think, of that all your questions are on the right track, and everyone is thinking a lot. Your thoughts are indicative of what a lot of media consumers are thinking these days. And so I feel a huge responsibility and a huge urgency to train a next generation of news writing and journalism students that can go out there and produce the news that the people need and that the public deserves, before it is too late. I really believe in the power of journalism to impact lives and to change communities, and whatever that means to you as far as community. And so I really hope that this was helpful. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to comment on this on YouTube down below, or put it in the pronto chat. I think that would be a really great way to keep these conversations going. If you have any follow-up questions or any more specific questions, now that I've answered some of these, but I hope I've been able to prove to you a little bit about why journalism is important today, why it's relevant, and why it's important to be trained in these skills, and a little bit more of an overview of how the news industry works today and how you guys can make a living at it and enter this job industry. Even though it's a shaky time, I think it's providing a lot more opportunities for especially young journalists to enter the field today. So I'm excited. I hope you're excited too. Thanks.